Broadcasting from the Woodpecker Studio in the great state of New Hampshire. Welcome to the Sounds Like a Search and Rescue podcasts. So You Wanna, a vignette series where we share post-hike reflections, challenges, lessons learned, and essential insights to prepare you for your next adventure in the White Mountains and beyond. So let's get started. Shall we?
All right, Nick, so you want to hike Whiteface and Passaconaway?
Sure, Mike, let's do it.
Let's do. Do you ever, like, I always just reference them as white. They're like one of the few mountains where I don't call them, I don't say like Mount Whiteface or Mount Passaconaway. I just call them Whiteface, Passaconaway.
Yeah, I kind of agree. It's funny how some mountains you call like Mount whatever, and then other ones I think you just refer to as, I don't know, like, I guess a lot of the way it's like I think of like Cabot or Wambeck. You don't say like Mount Wambeck or Washington Adams
would be another one.
Like, I don't know, or Flume, Liberty. I don't know. I guess a lot of
presidentials. I'll throw a mount in front of them, but like definitely Isolation's another one.
Yeah, Mount Isolation. I could see that. Yeah,
I don't know who makes up the rules on what mountains you can put the mount or the mountain before or after, but I just know there's rules.
Yeah, I don't know, and some of them have like Wachusett. I've seen as Wachusett Mountain and Mount Wachusett. I don't know. Go either way, but yeah.
We'll dig into that a little bit deeper, but yeah, we're going to talk about hiking Whiteface and Passaconaway. So these are 4,000 footers, and we put them together just because I've actually only hiked these together one time, and I think I've done like solo trips up both of them a couple of times. So you can do them together, you can do them on your own. There's a bunch of different approaches, but we figured that we would just put this together to combine both of them, and I think that we can probably cover all the routes and various ways to do it.
Yeah, for sure. I've done them, I think 4 times, and every single time I've done both of them. So, or at least Whiteface and Passaconaway, but yeah, I feel like most people tend to get, especially in the winter, like usually you're trying to get both of them done. Like people don't do solo trips unless you run into something unexpected.
Yeah. The summits are pretty close, so it is kind of tempting to grab both of them. But just to start off with, if you want to go back and get a little bit of history in this area, so this is there's a lot of history in this particular area.
There is
as far as like we talked a few episodes ago on the regular show about how a lot of the trail systems grew from Randolph and the Appalachia area, and it's kind of like this section here of what we call Wonalancet or Whiteface Passaconaway was kind of like it was being built down, and then it was being built from the south to the north as well. But that was a long time before these two areas connected, but there was a lot of activity going on. So if you want to hear some deeper history on this particular area, you can go check out episodes 87 or episodes 169. We did some history segments covering like historical people. We did some segments on the history of Passaconaway, and I think Nick's going to share a little bit more details about him as well. But at a very high level, I'll include in the show notes, there is a Wonalancet outdoor club manages all the trail systems in this particular area, and they have like a real great list of newsletters that go back until like the 1970s, I think. So you can read all about sort of the history there. Just before we get into the mountains, I think I'll just do as quickly as I can sort of a history is in the very early days of this particular area in Tamworth, there were settlers that were like in what we can now call like Sandwich and Tamworth. And there was 2 trails that had been built up. There was one McGrillis trail, which came in from like Flat Mountain Pond in that Sandwich area there, Nick. But it was a long approach. But I think some of the local like caretakers and the rudimentary hotels built an approach up to Whiteface from McGrillis Trail, which is not as, I don't think that that's really used that often anymore.
No, I was kind of talking to our friend Peter about this actually over the weekend, and he was kind of saying a lot of that trail, and from what I've explored too, I've experienced the same thing, but a lot of that trail system, if you get off the beaten path, is really nice descents, and you're not going to see like McCrillis Path, Flat Pond Mountain Trail, like you're not going to see a lot of people, odds are, even if it's a summer day or a fall day out there.
I suspect that that's an awesome like fall hike.
Yeah, I bet.
It would be my guess. I like that whole area for fall, but basically McGrillis was all you had in like the mid 1800s, and then by 1891 there was this Passaconaway Path that was cut, which is now called Dicey Mill Trail. So that's like the main approach to Passaconaway. So those were essentially, and they weren't connected at the time. So you had basically, if you wanted to go up Whiteface, you got McGrillis, and then on the Passaconaway side, you had Dicey Mill, which is over closer to what we now call like the Wonalancet area. And Wonalancet, by the way, that word, that is the son of Chief Passaconaway.
Correct.
So that's how they have it. And the name comes from a lady by the name of Kate Sleeper. So Kate Sleeper, some people are probably familiar. The Kate Sleeper Trail is really that connecting trail that connects Whiteface, Passaconaway over to the Waterville Valley area.
Yeah.
So it's named in her honor.
Yeah.
But Kate Sleeper, she was a Boston-born person that I guess she was the daughter of a sea captain. She had moved up. She lived in Roxbury, Mass. Had moved up to Tamworth in like 1890 and just decided to open a country, which is kind of interesting. She wasn't married or anything. And she just was like, I'm going to open an inn.
Yeah, it's
so
kind of forward-thinking mentality for that time, for sure.
Right. So she decided to open this inn, and then she ended up meeting a guy, and they got married and whatever. But originally it was called Birch Intervale, but then they later renamed it Wonalancet, and she ultimately bought a 600-acre farm, which was originally the property of an early settler by the name of Theophilus Brown.
Okay.
And she built a house on it and renamed it Wonalancet Farm. And at that point, there was a lot of activity going on. She had formed the Wonalancet Outdoor Club in the summer of 1891, and she had connected with Charles Fay, who was the AMC president, because he was a guest at her inn. And meeting with Fay and some other locals, very quickly the trail system started getting built up. So you had Dicey Mill and you had McGrillis, and then a guy named Nat Berry built the Brook Trail up Chicora. So off the backside of what I call the backside of Chicora, because it's just a different approach, not as popular. There was another innkeep that didn't like the approach from McGrillis, and he didn't. He felt like, okay, there's a better way to do this. So he ended up building, this guy's name was Tom Wiggin. So he ended up building a trail that goes off of Dicey Mills and up the side of Whiteface, which we'll talk about Tom Wiggin, but it's insanely steep. Have you been up that one, Nick?
I have not been up Tom Wiggin Trail, no, but I've heard, and I think there's even a sign that says like, this is like not recommended for descent or something like that up there.
Yeah. Caroline and I did it, and it was like, it's just very loose and not as super steep.
Gotcha.
And not a great trail. But basically then Charles Fay and this guy Nat Berry, who built the Brook Trail, they built a camp high up on Passaconaway, and then eventually everyone was like, this Tom Wiggin Trail is not working for us. So they
Tom Wiggin guy's crazy.
Yeah, they're like, Tom Wiggin is not working out. And then they built the Ridgeline Trail between Whiteface and Passaconaway, and then eventually the Kate Sleeper Trail. So that's the whole history there.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's interesting how that spider webbed out. One little detail too, I did have about Kate Sleeper, as you mentioned, Mike, she did get married a bit later in life to a man named Arthur T. Walden. And also notable for Kate Sleeper and kind of why she ended up being a really big namesake of the area is because she actually worked in 1914 to help preserve the forest of the Bowl, which is a glacial cirque that sits between Passaconaway and Whiteface. So that was a pretty big deal that she helped to preserve all that land. I'm not sure. I'm imagining part of that 600 acres she must have owned was part of the Bowl and the farmland beneath there.
Yeah, I would think so. And they talk about how she led like a parade of the locals when the Weeks Act was signed to celebrate that they were going to protect the forest. And it's interesting because if you read through the Wonalancet Outdoor Club newsletters from the 1970s and the early 1980s, once again, they were at the forefront of protecting the forest region because they were actually the ones that helped lobby to get the Sandwich Range designated as a wilderness region. So Sandwich Range wasn't designated as a wilderness region until like the early 1980s, and there was this window of opportunity. And the president of the Wonalancet Outdoor Club was a guy named George Zink, and he was able to testify in front of Congress in support of designating the Sandwich Range as wilderness in 1984. There was like this weird political window where like the Democrats and Republicans sort of came together, and they wanted to get these wilderness regions passed pretty quickly because of like some budget opportunities or something. I can't remember all the history on it, but the Wonalancet Club has been instrumental in protecting the forest and building up the trail systems in this whole area.
So the White Mountain National Forest came to be from the Weeks Act, correct?
Correct, yeah.
But the wilderness areas, I'm imagining, are different designations within the forest itself as far as development and stuff. Because like there's buildings in the White Mountain National Forest, but like wilderness areas have nothing. So I'm imagining it just preserved that area from further development.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. And I think that like there's like certain I think the Dry River is a good example where they had shelters that were built in there. Mm-hmm. And also I think that there was previously shelters on Whiteface and Passaconaway that once they disappeared, they just got rid of them and didn't rebuild them because of the forest designation in some cases. So it's an interesting history, and yeah, it's a good region. It's different. The personality of the Sandwich Range to me is different than a lot of areas in the Whites. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just like the tree. It's a little bit more open in my mind. It's a little bit more mossy. It's just a different characteristic and personality.
Yeah, to me, when I think of Whiteface, Passaconaway in that area, I think of it as being very quintessential New England. Like it feels like you could film like a movie about witches there or something. Like, besides that, I feel like a lot of people get spooky vibes on like Dicey's Mill Trail and stuff in Passaconaway for some reason, which you guys have chatted about before, but it is very like, especially when you're in that bowl, there's a couple old houses that I'm imagining date back to the 1800s in there. And it's very much like you walk out and it feels like you could be in like a New England postcard. It's everything you imagine, with stone walls and open fields and mountains in the background and big birches and these big trees kind of down low. And it's very picturesque.
Yeah, it is, but it's also, like you said, there is that spirit aspect to it, and not always in a good way. There is I've had a couple of like weird vibes on Passaconaway in that particular area, and we've talked about it on like Halloween and scary shows before too. It's just, there's something there. There's a spirit thing there that I can't put my finger on in that area. Yeah,
I can feel it. I mean, as you mentioned, it is very plain too. Like there's a lot of history in that area between the King Philip War and kind of settlers and the Native Americans and lumber companies kind of battling lawsuits and trying to get the land, and there's just a lot going on there historically. It's very interesting.
Right. And then do you want to throw in what you know about so there's Whiteface and then Passaconaway. So the Passaconaway is obviously named after the Pennacook Indian Native American chief Passaconaway. Did you pull anything on Passaconaway?
Sure, I did, Mike. So Passaconaway was actually originally known as North Whiteface, and this kind of dates back to Arnold Guyot's map in 1860. So eventually it was renamed to Passaconaway, and Passaconaway's current name was given by the state geologist Charles H. Hitchcock, who also has peaks named after him in the Whites. And it was in honor of the legendary chief of the Pennacook tribe, Passaconaway. So Passaconaway loosely translates to son of bear, and he was known as a powerful hunter, warrior, and sorcerer. So there's your spooky vibes.
Right.
The Pennacook tribe that he was the chief of lived in the lower Merrimack Valley, and Passaconaway ruled over a powerful confederation of tribes through the 1600s, and he was known to have peaceful relations with the new white settlers along the coast of New England. So this is before I imagine people really started to take over a lot of those lands and move further inland. So he had peaceful relations. Most of his descendants would not have peaceful relations with the white settlers that were moving in. And then legend holds that upon his death, he was borne to the summit of Agiokachuk, the Abenaki word for Mount Washington, and a sleigh drawn by giant wolves. So very interesting. And and a couple other things we mentioned. Wonalancet was one of his sons. So Wonalancet means pleasant breathing, and he had another son named Nanamokamuk. You kind of see these as names for spurs off Passaconaway, which I think is kind of cool that this ridge and kind of Wonalancet, it's a spur off kind of the mountain that is named after him, which I think is very fitting. It's kind of cool. And another thing that I found interesting is that among his grandchildren was Kangamagus, which means the fearless one, named after the Kangamagus Highway. So kind of another interesting little name connection there.
Yeah, and his connection to that particular area, he definitely made his way up to the northern New Hampshire locations, but he roamed, like, I think his main location was Lowell. He spent a lot of time in Lowell, like on the Merrimack, like fishing. They had salmon runs and stuff back then. And then he would make his way up into like Andover, Methuen. My guess is that he probably at some point made his way over where I am in Amesbury and Newburyport as well. So it wasn't like he spent all of his time up in the area where his mountain is named after him. He went up there, but he was much more around the Massachusetts area. So give the massholes their due, Nick.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's it. So I'm sure we'll throw in some other history as we move along. But why don't you give a high level overview of both of these mountains?
Sure. So Whiteface, Passaconaway, they always seem to get grouped together because of how close they are. Whiteface stands at 4,020 feet, and as we mentioned, it's part of the Sandwich Range along with Passaconaway. Whiteface and Passaconaway pretty much sit in the geographical center of the Sandwich Range, and the Sandwich Range constitutes at the western terminus of the Tri-Pyramids, more or less, and then it goes all the way east across, more or less south of the Kangamagus Highway to Chikura. So that whole area in between is the Sandwich Range. And the most common trailhead, we're going to talk about all different routes to Whiteface, Passaconaway. The most common trailhead is going to be the Ferncroft trailhead. And this is located off 113A in the unincorporated township of Wonalancet, which is a part of Albany.
Yeah, and I would say that the Ferncroft trailhead to me is, even if you're not a hiker, if you just listen to the show for whatever reason, especially in the fall, worth driving over there just to check. It's like and I think this is probably why you brought up about the sort of quintessential New England is like that drive up the dirt road to that parking lot, and then you've got the farmhouses that are there with the front porches, basically sitting at the bottom of the mountain bowl. Is just it's amazing, beautiful photo.
Yeah, it's a really pretty ride, and I think it depends where you're coming from, but if you're coming from south of the Whites or more straight south, Mike's a little bit north up in Amesbury, I'm southeast down Rehoboth. But it's not only the closest trailhead actually to my house, without traffic, I should say. But it is kind of like an hour almost off 93 when you get off the highway for me. So it's actually a pretty good ride, but it's a very scenic and beautiful ride. And it's a little bit different than I think some of the vibes, like you get off Route 2 to Appalachia, or you're getting off like 16 to the kind of the eastern side of Washington, Wildcats, that area, or like off 93 to like Franconia Notch. Like a lot of the Whites and the 4,000 footers that you're hiking are more or less off state highways or interstates. They're not actually off sort of these dirt roads and things. So that's a little bit different too, when you're driving to hike these two.
Yeah, no, it's a fun drive, and it is like an amazing view as you pull down that dirt road. And it's probably, I don't know, about a half a mile drive, but you get the view of the parking lot from a pretty far distance. So, and there is, just as a reminder, there is some restrictions that over the years. There has been some issues with people parking out of the parking lot, the designated parking area, and parking along the dirt road. They did expand the parking spaces a while back, probably a couple of years ago, and then they did put in no parking signs fine. So you do need to make sure that you get there. I think in fall season, it certainly can get filled up. I've typically never had any issues with getting a space if I've gotten there by 8 o'clock or earlier. I can't say like by 9, 10 o'clock. If you're like a late starter, you might run into some issues, but generally the parking lot there is usually pretty reachable as long as you get there a little early.
Yeah, I would agree. You definitely are probably taking a chance rolling in at like 9:30, 10 o'clock on, say, a Saturday in October or something like that. But most of the time, as long as you're there by 8 o'clock, you should be good to go. There's a lot of room there, especially since they expanded it.
Right. So continue, Nick. I interrupted you.
No problem. So we'll dive into a little bit more information on the peaks themselves. So we talked about Passaconaway, kind of what's that's named after, but we'll talk about Whiteface next. So Whiteface is named after and is a reference to the prominent cliff on the south side of the mountain. And this is actually really visible, like we were saying, on that drive up 113A. There's a couple pokes through the woods. Like, definitely make sure you're paying attention to the road, especially if it's the morning, moose, deer, etc. But you really get some nice views to your left as you're heading north. And you can really see that prominent cliff on Whiteface. You also can see this cliff really well if you're poking around on the summit ledges on Blueberry Ledge Trail, and kind of look out to your west, and you'll see this sort of giant slide that actually drops down, and that's kind of the namesake of the mountain. So Moses Sweetser noted in his 1876 guidebook that there was a great landslide in October of 1820 that bore the rock face, and he kind of mentions this being the namesake, but the name actually traces back much earlier than that. So the name appears in Sandwich Town records as early as 1781, so we're talking like Revolutionary War kind of era people were calling it that, over 40 years before. And the name also appears in different variations in Jeremy Belknap's 1784 journal, Philip Carrigan's 1816 map of the area. And it suggests that there was a bare rock on the south slope going well back, perhaps several hundred years from earlier landslides. And in his 1821 Northern Traveler publishing, Timothy Dwight referred to it as White-Faced Mountain. And Arnold Guyot labeled this as South Whiteface in his 1860 map. And Passaconaway, as we earlier mentioned, was actually known as North Whiteface, which kind of makes sense. Though Passaconaway to me it has a couple slides, but I don't think any visible from that side. So I imagine it was just kind of a convenience of like, that's the South Whiteface Peak and the North Whiteface Peak.
Right.
Because they kind of are more or less the same mountain when you think about it. Likely first ascended by a group of locals in the late 1820s. We mentioned the hiking culture for sure. I mean, there's inns and farmers and stuff around Wonalancet, but it goes back hundreds of years, which is really cool. And that's part of why this trail system is so fleshed out. And it was subsequently ascended by Arnold Guyot in the mid 1800s when he was kind of poking around and starting to publish White Mountain maps and guides of the area. And it's worth noting Whiteface is the southernmost of the New Hampshire 4,000 footers. So if you were to look at it on a map, this is the furthest south one. So Whiteface, kind of interesting. It's not, I would say it's not a peak, Mike. Like, what do you think when you have a Whiteface? Do you think I don't think of it as having amazing views. I'm kind of always surprised when I go back there though, that it does have kind of these outstanding views. But if for some reason it doesn't stick in my head as one of the ones that I'm like, oh, blown away by, and then I go back and I'm like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm blown away by it. I think it's, the thing that the first time I went, I was like, oh, this is really great. But I do think that it sort of loses out a little bit because when it's the lakes region is kind of blocked by the Ossipee Range and the Squam Range, so you don't get like those great lake views or as spectacular lake views because you're a little bit farther away. But I do think that it's got a decent view. I would say that there's like when you go up we'll talk about this sort of rock face climb that you have to go up to. There's another there's a view out to the east that's pretty good, and then when you get up to the higher section, then there's a view a little bit out towards I guess you're looking towards, I would say, like Jennings and Sandwich Dome and Sachem Peak in that area there. So yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, you got to poke around a little bit, but it does have great views. And as we mentioned, not necessarily known for views like some, I think all the Whites generally, I mean, unless you're talking like Owl's Head, like some of them really truly have no views, but Whiteface is definitely, it's like an 8 out of 10, I would say. So it's true, Summit is viewless, but great views are obtained from the ledges along Blueberry Ledge Trail, just south of the summit proper. So like I said, you might have to poke around a little bit, but really some interesting views back there. And I think you can even see like around your kind of the shoulder to like Washington and stuff in spots, which is pretty neat.
Right.
So Mike kind of already touched around Kate Sleeper, but we didn't mention that there's 2 peaks along the Kate Sleeper Trail that connects to Tri-Pyramids. These sometimes are done in conjunction with Whiteface, and East and West Sleeper are actually both part of the New England 100 highest. And I should say East Sleeper is part of the New England 100 highest, and East and West Sleeper are part of the New Hampshire 100 highest. And that's a really, really cool trail out there. And we kind of talked about how McCrillis Trail and Path, one of the original trails to the summit, was named after the McCrillis family. And they were known to farm the Whiteface Intervale area in the mid to late 1800s. So that's just a bit more history on Whiteface itself. So Passaconaway, we talked pretty extensively about Passaconaway, and I highly recommend too, if you want to dig up, there's just a ton of history in his entire family. We kind of mentioned some of the names, but really interesting rabbit hole to go down if you're interested in early New England history between Native Americans and kind of the settlers that were here at the time. Definitely recommend checking that out. So we did not talk about the nearby Mount Hibbard, which I believe was an X52 with a view, right, Mike?
It was. It was, yeah.
So Hibbard didn't come up in our previous sort of nomenclature conversation. This is part of the wonalancet sort of range that stretches off more or less the southern tip of Passaconaway. This was named for Judge Ellery Albee Hibbard, and he was a Laconia lawyer who represented a lumber company in the 1880s in a lawsuit about whether a logging road could be built along the Swift River in the nearby town of Tamworth. Then Square Ledge, also kind of a branch off Passaconaway. This is also an X52 with a view that still has pretty decent views. I've checked it out. And that one, not too much of a head scratcher there. It's a giant square ledge when you view it from afar. So there you go. Olivarian Brook, which is a trail and also a drainage that kind of sits in the Sandwich Range wilderness to the east of Passaconaway and comes off the mountain. There's some speculation about where the name came from. The Wonalancet Outdoor Club actually has a different thought upon the origins of this name versus the AMC guide. But it's believed that it may have been named for an incident where an Albany resident, Olive Deering, fell into a stream and drowned. As far as first ascents of this mountain, it's actually not really known. I guess the townspeople hadn't really checked out Passaconaway as much for it's like, even Mike, you kind of mentioned like there were trails built to Whiteface directly kind of earlier than Passaconaway. But it's believed that Arnold Guyot likely ascended this in the mid 1800s when he was poking around the Sandwich Range.
Right.
And then Passaconaway, I think one of the most impressive things when I think about this mountain is it looks awesome from different vantage points from far away. It's kind of this giant, the guide describes it as a dome. I actually think it almost looks more of a pyramid shape, especially if you're looking at it from Hedgehog and Potash 252 with the view peaks that you can access off the Kank that are just to the north of the summit. Hiked that like last year in November where you could see with the leaves down, and Passaconaway is like, it's like, oh my gosh, it is like kind of a really cool looking feature that you've got in the background there. So if you do want to check out what Passaconaway looks like from afar, I think the most impressive place to do that is probably Hedgehog and Potash just to the north.
Yeah, those 250, those are both 52 with the views, and I think that those are good fall hikes if you want to immerse yourself into foliage, like you're down below. When Passaconaway basically just stands right out in front of you. So, and from that vantage point, you can see there is some abandoned slide trails off the backside of or the north side of Passaconaway that I've definitely read about people doing those, and I think that they've been on our list of we got to go check those out, but I've never done them.
Yeah, I'd be curious if maybe Steve Smith has poked around those. I know it came up in our...
Yeah, there's some articles.
Okay. In our slides episode, but yeah, you can see on that side for sure that there's a bit. And again, like really wild, like I think even compared to some slides in the Prezzies, people probably get into there a little bit less just because it's a little bit more remote. So Passaconaway doesn't get rave reviews for most of the hiking community, I would say, for views. However, there are different outlooks from different places. If you catch this one in the winter, this is great. The northwest outlook, which is on a ledge at the very top of the ascent of the Dicey Mill Trail. If you've got like 2 or 3 feet of snow, as when I did in the winter, you actually have this fantastic vantage point. From west to east, you really have the Osceolas, Franconia Ridge, Tri-Pyramids, Carrigan. And you're looking really right into the Pemi. But again, in the summer, you probably can kind of poke above the trees and see it a little bit. It's probably going to be one of those, if our podcast is sticking around for another 5 or 10 years and you're listening to this, there might not be any views truthfully from there, unless we want to like get on each other's shoulders or something and try to poke up and look around. Then there's a south outlook from a ledge located beside the Walden Trail at 3950 feet. And this provides views south and east, taking much of the lakes region. As Mike mentioned, though, you do have the Ossipee kind of in front of the lakes region, so you can't see quite down to, I think, like Gunstock and things like that. And you can also see some peaks in Maine. This outlook, Mike, I could not remember in my head exactly where it is, to be honest. So I'm kind of glad the guide called it out.
Right, yeah. There's a little sign up there, too, that points you to it.
Yeah. Then we have the east outlook, which is on a ledge beside the Walden Trail. This one I very much remember. I actually stopped here with our friend Paul Lamar when we did a Sandwich Range traverse. And you can actually see from Mount Washington all the way over to the Ossapees. You do need to move around a little bit. There's some trees up there, but it's a good one. And then lastly, the probably the crown jewel of Passaconaway views, and this actually is a really spectacular view, is the north outlook. And this is basically located a quarter mile and also noting 200 feet, just about 185 feet below the summit. So it is, you are going to go down and have to go back up if you do to get to this view, but I highly recommend it because you're not going to see anything else as spectacular from Passaconaway. And this kind of looks basically north into the Pemi Wilderness and kind of across the Kank. And you can actually see 33 of the New Hampshire 48 from this kind of point, which that kind of was a surprising stat to me. When you think about Passaconaway, you don't think about being able to see most of the 48. And on a good day, you can actually see all the way from the Kinsmans to the west to basically Middle Sister and the Sisters of Mount Jacura to the east. So that whole expanse with Washington and everything. And this is one, like the first time we did it, it was in like mid to late September. I remember it was because before we got married and our moms were yelling at me and Ash for going hiking because we could break an ankle or something. But right. You could see the foliage actually kind of getting more spectacular looking further north up towards Washington from where we were. So it was a very cool kind of perspective looking up there.
Well, yeah, Nick, I think I have to correct myself too, because I think it's not the sign is not the south outlook. It's actually the north outlook that has the sign to it.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. That makes more sense. But yeah, you'll see a little sign pointing off. And yeah, like some people too, I've been up there before where you're like, oh, maybe I don't want to go down. Like go down to the outlook as long as you have time, because it's really fantastic.
Right. So I guess, Nick, probably moving on to just the approaches. I can start with the Whiteface discussion, and then you can do the approaches to Passaconaway, and just jump in if you have anything to add here. Sure. But essentially, from Ferncroft, which is the main trailhead, if you're going to go up Whiteface, the most common trail to use is Blueberry Ledge Trail. So this is on the Terrifying 25 list too. So you'll get a Terrifying 25 if you go up on this. I personally don't believe that this is actually very terrifying. I find it to be like a nice trail. Yeah. I guess the reason it's on the Terrifying 25 is just because it is pretty open and ledgy on the lower sections. Which I kind of like. It's like you get some nice lower views on it, and you can, you can look back and relax. I tend to kind of meander on this trail, and it gets a little bit confusing because there's a Blueberry Ledge cutoff, and then there's the actual Blueberry Ledge Trail. So the cutoff is essentially like a direct path to the top side of Blueberry Ledge Trail. If you need to go to the true Blueberry Ledge Trail, then you can connect with McGrillis Path, and there's this Tilton Spring Path as well down there that you can get to. So, but McGrillis Path and McGrillis Trail are a little bit, they're two different trails, just to keep that in mind, but they all kind of head over to Flat Mountain Pond in that particular area. But Blueberry Ledge Trail or Blueberry Ledge Cutoff, whichever one you decide. If you decide to take the cutoff, just remember you won't get credit for the Terrifying 25. But correct. Essentially, this is an open ledge trail, kind of lower down, which is unique. I mean, there's some trails like that, but they tend to be a little bit higher up at like 3,000 feet. But there must have been like some forest fires or something that just wiped out that area, because it's pretty wide open, even at like 2,000 feet or so.
Yeah, I feel it always comes to mind, like you said, I think you hit like right around 2,000 feet. There's like open ledge and kind of some trees sticking into almost bare rock in spots. And you can kind of already at that point, you're looking out to like where Ferncroft is and you can kind of see it behind you, especially if you check it out like in November or something, that time of year. It's really cool.
Right. I guess the moats are like that now that I'm thinking about it. Like they have those open ledges down low, so maybe it's similar. But the trail itself, like there's definitely some steeper sections as you get going, but it's kind of like a steady climb up to, I don't know, like there's a point in, maybe it's at like 2,300 feet or 2,400 feet where it does kind of flatten out. Like you climb and then you get to this little plateau for maybe a quarter mile, half a mile, and you're sort of like it's open. You even drop down a little bit. I feel like there might be some water sources there in wetter seasons, but not really at this time of the year. And then from there, you will ascend up the Blueberry Ledge Trail, and then there's this section where you connect with the Tom Wiggin Trail, and that it's around like 3,400 feet. And then I think once you get up to like, I can't remember if it's 3,600 or 3,800 feet, there's basically a chimney that you have to climb up. Yeah. And it can be dicey. If you're with a dog, I think if you're with a bigger dog, you have to factor this in, that it's not that easy to get up.
Yeah, I think we talked about that this was one that they lowered Brutus, the legendary Brutus bushwhack dog, down when they would do it. So it's a good point. And I mean, like Mike was saying, like I don't think there's anything particularly terrifying about the trail, but there is that one spot where you do need to use hands and feet to get up the ledge. And the one thing that surprised me when we first did it is more you like pop out and you look to the right at first and it's kind of a ledge that goes into nothingness, but that's not where the trail goes. You don't have to go up that. But if you go up, like when I went up with Steve, I think in the spring, I'm trying to think if that was still spring or winter, but we went up it with some ice and it was a little interesting going up that with some ice on it. Like we didn't have crampons. You almost could have, but I don't know if they would have helped. Like, I don't know if it's because it's windy, it doesn't get a lot of snowpack there often. Like, I don't think you're going to really kick in with snowshoes up there that often. So it might be kind of an annoying where, like you said, a lot of that is ascent's nice. So you might need your snowshoes kind of up until that point in the winter and then have to put on spikes for like a hot minute and then put your snowshoes back on. But
right, yeah, I think that I went up in the winter, and I think that it was just like I could kick step in, but going down wouldn't be great, I don't think. Yeah,
and you might want to avoid this one if it's like poured and it's wet the night before, especially if you got like wet leaves or something on there. That'd be the only time where I would think about maybe not trying to go up that way, or even if you're going to go up that way and it's wet, definitely going down would be a bit hairier, I think.
Right, yeah. And then so basically once you get up to that section, now you're on what's called the Rollins Trail. So Blueberry Ledge ends, and then you're on the Rollins Trail towards the top. There's like this other little summit that you get to, and it's kind of open, got some good views like we talked about earlier. And then the true summit, you got to go up a little bit on the trail past the Kate Sleeper Trail, and then you'll hit the true summit, which is just at 4,000 feet, a little bit over 4,000 feet, right?
Yep. Yeah, just barely 4,020 feet, according to the latest LiDAR surveys. Yeah,
and then you can continue forward and go over to Passaconaway and do a full loop, or you can head back down. But that's probably the most common approach that you will take. You can also come in from the southwest, which is basically like the Whiteface Intervale Road, Flat Mountain Pond Trailhead. I've never done this before, but essentially like you would just take the McGrillis Trail and the Rollins Trail out and back, and that's about, I think out and back on the Blueberry Ledge is 8.4 miles and 3,100 feet of gain. The Flat Mountain Pond approach with McGrillis is 10.5 miles at 3,500 feet of gain. And then if you want to go in, I would never even think to do this, but if you want to go in Downsbrook.
I was reading this thinking the same thing. I was like, I wouldn't do this. Not to cut you off, Mike, but I was like, this is funny.
That's fine. Yeah, exactly. It's like maybe in the winter you might want to do this, but this is from the Kank Highway, Downsbrook Trail to Kate Sleeper to Rollins, which is about 12.5 miles, but a little less elevation, like 2,850. And just on the winter stuff, Ferncroft does get plowed, and there is usually a lot of people going up Blueberry Ledge. So on a weekend, I don't think you'll be by yourself, but just be prepared to have a little bit of an interesting experience when it comes to getting up that one little chimney.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so that is Whiteface approaches out and back, and then do you want to cover Passaconaway?
Sure. Sure. So Passaconaway, start with the north approach. Again, and we're going over these. These are just out more or less. Loops are out and backs. If you're doing either summit, we'll kind of go into loops next. I would say I got to think a lot of people try to tackle these both in one day, as we mentioned earlier. But just for stats sake and kind of outlining just the plethora of trails that there are in the area. But from the north, basically the Kank. You can take the Oliverian Brook Trail, Passaconaway Cutoff, the Square Ledge Trail, and Walden Trail out and back. That'll put you at 10 miles and 2,900 feet. I've done this side as part of a sandwich range traverse, which is pretty decent. The steepest section is Walden Trail going up to Passaconaway. There's a pretty good steep section there where you'll think that someone teleported you into the North of the Presidentials for maybe a quarter mile, but then it kind of ends. I remember being there with Paul and being like, where the heck did this come from? Because Oliverian Brook Trail is so nice. And Passaconaway Cutoff and Square Ledge Trail were pretty nice too. There's also one section, I'm not sure if it was Passaconaway Cutoff or the Square Ledge Trail, but there's a ledge that you can climb up to that I think maybe Paul had noted, or maybe Mike Trokey passed along, that you can kind of climb up on and get some views back to Washington. So that's a cool one. And kind of as noted with the Downs Brook side, or the Downs Brook one, is the Kank must be a little bit higher than Ferncroft. So this is 10 miles and 2,900 feet. So not too bad, but the bulk of the elevation is going to be probably the last mile or two going up Passaconaway.
Yeah. The thing I'll say about Passaconaway is like that ending approach, especially like the last, whatever it is, 600 or 700 feet, is like sneaky steep.
Yeah. It kind of
you just don't expect it.
It winds up, gets a little scrambly in a couple spots, kind of like around, I think when you hit that outlook that we mentioned earlier, sort of on the eastern side, it kind of ends from there, and then you're like basically there. But yeah, it is very sneaky because it kind of lures you in with a very flat sort of long walk in on Oliverian Brook, where you're not really noticing your elevation, and then it kind of just whacks you in the face with it.
Yeah, it's like either direction you come in from, whether you come in from Walden or Dicey's Mill, there's the it's sort of an eroded, like rocky climb that it's steep, and it goes on for like an extended amount of time. So they certainly give you your due at the very end.
Yeah, and it's one of those, like we talked about the pyramidal or the dome shape of it before, but you look at that after you've been up Passaconaway and you're like, okay, that makes sense why I had to climb up aggressively for the last like half a mile to reach it. Yeah, Dicey's Mill Trail is no picnic going up the other side either. No. And I thought this was cool, but I wouldn't have thought to do this. But you could, just to add Square Ledge, the X52 with a view onto this route, kind of makes it a little bit of a, I guess you loop out over Square Ledge, but it actually only adds 1.2 miles and 200 feet. So that's kind of something cool to check out. It is steep going down or up Square Ledge. I don't think that trail gets as much traffic. There are a couple nice views just below Square Ledge as well, if you poke around. I remember I went up there a couple summers ago, and it was a lot of fun. So south approach from Ferncroft, the most popular one by far, Dicey's Mill Trail out and back, 9.2 miles and 2,900 feet. So pretty easy peasy to follow there. Then there's a couple different loop options. And a little caveat here is like, if you just look on a map, there's so many trails in that area. Like you could really do some interesting routes if you wanted to. You could do like 20 mile, 5,000 foot routes if you really wanted to have a day just within that area. But we're just kind of calling out the most common ones here. So just mentioning that. But you can make a loop up Passaconaway, Ferncroft in, basically, these two use Dicey's Mill Trail for descent, but you can go up Old Mast Road to Walden Trail and Dicey's Mill Trail, and then descend with the descent down Dicey's Mill Trail. This will be 9.4 miles, 3,300 feet. Or you can use the Wonalancet Range Trail, which will take you over Mount Hibbard and kind of that whole area, and then connect to the Walden Trail, go down Dicey's Mill Trail, and that's 9.8 miles and 3,400 feet. So have you checked out Hibbard and kind of Wonalancet in that area before, Mike?
I did. I've been done all that area there. So one time I did a trip over to, I did like that Kelty Box Canyon trip, or Kelly, whatever.
Kelly Trail.
Yeah, Mount Paugus. But then I did another one where I went up, and I think I did Old Mast Road, and then looped around to Hibbard and Wonalancet. And Wonalancet has Hibbard has a small view, I think. And then Mount Wonalancet also has a nice view into that like research bowl area as well. So, yeah, it's a nice little loop for, I think I did them in the fall too. It was a good day.
Cool. Do you want to kind of talk about some of the common loop options to bag both Whiteface and Passaconaway in the same day?
Yeah. So I think that the, just starting from the north, if you wanted to go over Oliverian Brook Trail and then Passaconaway Cutoff, you can hit Square Ledge. Then you can do the Walden Trail, and then Dicey's Mill to the summit of Passaconaway. And then you could just do an out and back from Whiteface, and then I guess you would head over to Kate Sleeper Trail and then Downsbrook Trail and then a mile road walk back to Oliverian Brook from the trailhead. This is a beast of a hike. So this would be about 15 and a half miles, 4,000 feet of elevation gain. So, and then you've got to finish off that road walk on the Kank. And you sure it's a mile? I feel like it's a little bit longer than that.
That's what the guide had. Yeah, I questioned that myself. It looked longer on Gaia, but I don't know. That's what Steve Smith and Mike Dickerman have in there. So
okay.
So if you're doing the road walk and it feels longer than that, and you measure it longer than that, then maybe it needs to be updated in the guide. But that's what they called it. Right. I wouldn't have thought to really do that loop myself either, to be honest. So.
Yeah, exactly. And then next is from the south. So this is from Ferncroft. This is by far the most common route. This would be Blueberry Ledge to the Rollins Trail to Whiteface Summit, and then head over to Dicey's Mill Trail out and back to the Passaconaway Summit, and then down Dicey's Mill. So this is a lollipop loop of 12 miles and 4,000 feet of elevation gain. And this would be also the most common route in the winter.
And one thing I was going to say about that, and we touched upon this with Passaconaway's sort of summit cone, but that one is always kind of sneaky, I think, difficult at the end, because that last bump up Passaconaway is like a good bump of elevation, especially if you're dealing with any ice or wetness or anything like that. I think it's almost one of those that's a little bit more difficult. Not that a 4,000 foot day is easy, but I think it's a little bit more difficult than the numbers indicate.
Right. Yeah. So I think that just overall, Nick, this particular trail area and this whole area of the Whites is just incredible. Like Wonalancet, Sandwich Range Wilderness, so many different options. There are, I think Paugus is a current 52 with a view. You've got Square Ledge and Hibbard, which are former 52 with the views. You've got the Kelly Trail, Box Canyon. And you can also consider doing various versions of Sandwich Range traverses where you tie Whiteface and Passaconaway together with the Tri-Pyramids. You can even get over to Chicora in that area as well.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Maybe we can share it when we publish the episode, but I had actually taken video a few years ago where I did sort of a day just hanging out there. I wanted to get Paugus, but yeah, I went out in the Sandwich Range Wilderness, kind of to Square Ledge, looped around, came back up Oliverian Brook, I think pushed through 500 spider webs, and then made my way up to Paugus. And I went through that Kelly Trail Box Canyon on the way up out to Square Ledge and kind of explored a bunch of the area. But it was just really beautiful out there. I didn't see anybody, and it was kind of funny because I got out of the trailhead and there must have been 100 cars there. It was a nice September Friday or something. So it was kind of cool to be and weird that I was by myself most of the day. And then, Sandwich Range Traverse, if you want to check that out, I kind of tackled that with Paul a few years ago. And that was a really good time. The area across the Sleepers and the Kate Sleeper Trail is absolutely beautiful. There's tons of moose droppings that you're going to see in there. East Sleeper is kind of an interesting it's kind of a herd path bushwhack. And there's an area that was decimated by a hurricane, maybe Hurricane Irene, where there's just blowdowns kind of everywhere you see in there. That's kind of almost eerie. But just a gorgeous area out there in Wonalancet.
Yeah. And I think that in closing, Nick, the one thing I would just urge the listeners is just keep in mind that when you park in Ferncroft, that as you head out to get to the trails, especially if you're going to Blueberry Ledge or the Blueberry Ledge Cutoff, it is a bit of a road walk in the very beginning. You'll see the signage that will take you over the bridge, but just be respectful of the neighbors that live there. I think all the neighbors that live there sort of understand the history and support the trail club, but from the perspective perspective of like, don't park on the road, don't leave any trash around, try to be, relatively quiet. I know that, it's an exciting time when you're heading out for a hike and you want to talk with your friends and whatnot, but just be respectful of the local folks there. A lot of them are caretakers and stewards of that area, and they want the hikers, they welcome the hikers to be there, but just don't screw it up for the rest of us, please.
Yes, well said. Just be respectful, use common sense. Don't do anything stupid.
Yeah. Don't get this taken away from us, people, or you'll hear from me.
You'll hear from Mike directly.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool.
So, but yeah, it's a great area. So listen to this and then report back to us and tag us on the Slasher Podcast Instagram if you take this hike.
Yep, go crush some peaks.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to learn more about the topics covered on today's show, please check out the show notes and safety information on slasherpodcast.com. That's SLASR podcast.com. You can also follow the show on Facebook and Instagram. We hope you'll join us next week for another great show. Until next time, on behalf of Mike and Stomp, get out there and crush some peaks.
Knock on